Awesome. So we have with us Craig Perry, the producer, the person responsible for the entire Final Destination franchise, as well as this other little mini franchise you may have never heard of called American Pie.
Well, I appreciate you saying responsible because that's what exactly my mother says. She says, Craig, you're responsible for all this. I'm like,
Oh man.
Some of you may have seen him in the comments of our first video, first Final Destination reaction, and things just started connecting from there, and now we have
Things escalated.
the man himself here. Thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy
Yes,
schedule.
thank you so much.
We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. I very much enjoy what you guys do, and I think you're building out a really interesting, fun, and a creative community there. So hopefully we can help that grow.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Thank you very much. So you've been telling us that you're filming right now in Portland, right?
Yes.
How's that going?
We start shooting a week from Monday. It's a very small little Lionsgate movie. But it's very different than a lot of the things I've worked on, which is one of the reasons why it's not necessarily about the money on this one. It's about, can we kind of do something that's unique and different?
Mm-hmm.
So as you can tell, my glorious hotel room, my glamorous hotel room, my massive, no, it's not that big. That, we're in the throes of production. You sort of like just have to figure out how to just to get out of bed in the morning, go to work, and come back at midnight and go to sleep. Make sure you do it every day going through. So we'll see. Look, if the weather holds and we have as little rain as possible, yeah, right. We should be out of here by the 20th, I think, of February.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So we do have a bit of a couple of questions to ask you about Final Destination, maybe some of your other works, and yeah, Simone, you wanna get us going for the first one?
Alrighty. We're starting off with sort of a three-parter here.
Okay.
It's a three-parter. We're really just gonna milk it for all it's worth. So what we've seen of the franchise so far is just so many creative deaths. So we were wondering if you could tell us some of your favorites, maybe some ideas that were discarded, or and what I really want to know is, were there any death ideas that were thrown around the table that everyone was just like, no, we can't show that. That's too much.
Actually, that's a great question. And it's a great question because it just kind of goes right to the process of how these movies get made. And often you just have to figure out, well, what is a location that is accessible, that most people generally find themselves in? And then the extension of that is, well, how can we imbue that familiar location with a sense of malevolence and dread? Are there enough things that you can justify in that location so it doesn't feel like you've overwhelmed it with obstacles that seem forced?
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, how could someone actually die in that location? And then we sort of say, okay, what's the kind of character who would be in that location? So it's a weird way of thinking about these things in terms of a story construct way. You start with the macro and you work your way down to, well, then who would be there? And that becomes the character that you have to then reverse engineer into your story to justify why you're earning that set piece. Because the set pieces, let's all be honest, we're not watching this for the great drama. We're watching these things because you want to see somebody get dispatched in glorious. We have to somehow make it credible and exciting. So, I mean, for me, just because and I'm sure you've seen bits and pieces, so I'm going to try not to spoil 4 and 5 for you guys. I love the gymnastics sequence in 5.
Okay.
Because gymnastics, to me, there's artistry, there's athleticism, but there's also this sense of like, what are they doing? That's so dangerous. Like, these girls are going to die horribly if things go slightest bit awry. Right. So that tension that is inherent to watching it, I wanted to tap into. So we created an entire gymnastics sequence in 5 that I think is one of the best ones because it's super cinematic too. It's all about tracking various things in that location that either individually or in concert will cause that poor girl to sort of trot off our mortal coil.
That sounds awesome.
Reaction to that. It's awful and awesome at the same time.
Oh, can't wait to see it.
What's interesting is the bus hit from FD1 was always scripted that way. It was scripted as an out of nowhere, it comes and hits, but it was, as I mentioned earlier, intermittently raining on that day. So when you make a movie, you have different things that are called plates, which is sort of like the background image, which is like a clean street. And then you get one of that same image with the bus going through. It's sort of wiping frame. And then you have another plate where you have the dummy standing there waiting to get hit by that bus. You try and combine all of them together. So as we're gathering all these elements, which was taking a lot of time, and there was also going to be a little bit of a morph from the dummy, from the live actress when she steps into position into the dummy. So there's a lot of like a $30,000 visual effects transition so that we try and smooth out and try and get as close. Well, the editor, who was an old school grumpy guy, was like looking at the goes, give me 30 minutes. And he just took everything out of the camera, went down, and what he had realized is the front of the bus is the snub nose bus. It's a flat front. He did a little fuzzy wipe at the front of the bus. So when the actress steps into frame, it's all live action to the last frame of the bus hits her.
Ooh.
It was an in-camera, in essence, visual effect. And then once you get to that position, he did sort of quick cut to the dummy getting hit.
Yeah.
There's one frame where you could see her like a little bit of jigger on her arm because the girl, our actress, did a pretty good job matching the position of the dummy. And he saved us 30 grand just by being smart with how editing works, persistence of vision. Exactly. I was like,
That's
wow,
amazing.
well played.
Wow.
That is so cool.
So that's just like, I appreciate when people can use their skills and history to make a moment like that even better. Because as I think I was mentioning to you guys off camera, there's something about when you have physical, real people doing the things they do. I mean, visual effects are great, but I think they're best when they're augmenting reality, not replacing reality.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And that's one of the hallmarks of this crazy franchise is just on the day when we're doing a set piece, every department has to bring their A game, from stunts, visual effects, special effects, makeup effects, because they're all working at the same time and in concert. So there's a lot of prep that goes in just to make sure every department is talking to each other. And I think the bus hit was one where everybody did what they needed to do, but then one person said, wait a second. And then now that sequence that was sort of the first, I think, memeable element of the franchise, right?
Yeah, that really shocked us. So it really just came out of nowhere and was so fast and impactful. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that I know that I want to watch it again. I want to really get in there.
You'll see that little jigger of the arm, and you'll realize that's where they cut to the dummy getting.
Cool. I love that.
Craft service table. We just went to craft. He said, "Here's some strawberries. Here's some this." Now another one, and this is in 2, which you guys have seen, is when little Timmy gets hit by the plate of glass outside the dentist's office.
Yeah.
Easily one of my favorite, not just because I think a dentist office is a nascent fear everybody has.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go in and get flick their teeth. But I love the fact it was a misdirect. It didn't happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that, I think, speaks to there are certain sort of paradigms that we sort of have to look at with each sequence, say, how are we going to pay it off? And what's the best way to pay it off? And originally, little Timmy was like 8 or 9, I think, in the first draft. And that's one where the studio's like, that's
a 9-year-old getting crushed by a plane of glass might be too much. Yeah.
Too much. What's funny though is the first time we did the stunt, the dowels that were holding the dummy up didn't break. So he got squished, but his legs were still standing. So we actually had to do that one twice. And they went through and they had a second dummy, but it was designed and built the same way. So they had to go and quickly score all the dowels so that they would collapse appropriately in a even kind of way.
That was definitely one of my favorite deaths.
Yeah.
So squishy, so unexpected. Love it.
Awful. He just looks backwards and collapses. He folds like a bad run at the presidency. Boom.
The lead up to it, like you said, the misdirect was one of my favorite because it was so tense for so long and then just nothing. And then death.
And I think for me, just because like the Eric Bress, Gruber and Bress, who are the writing team who did that one, just to come up with the idea that they're in sort of like, he's a little too, like if you'll notice, a little too old for the production design. Like it's designed to be kids dentistry. He's like 15. So we're like, okay, he's at the tail end. That's how we justified it. But just a little fish in the mobile falling into his mouth is the last thing you'd think would orchestrate itself. And that's another thing about that sequence I like is that you take an element that seems innocuous or benign, and that becomes the instrument of death that you would never have imagined. And so it's fun for the audience to try and play along with how these things will actually play out as the sequence unfolds. I think that, the tanning beds are a fun sequence just because look, this was interesting, and I think I give the director credit. He wanted the girls to be nude, but he wanted them to be so blasé about the nudity that at a certain point, it's not about them being nude. It's about them being exposed and vulnerable to what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it worked because it's titillating for about 15 seconds. And then after that, you don't even care. You're like, oh, what's going to happen to them? And he wanted to get to that place where they had no course. There's no place for them to hide. They are completely exposed. The girls were game. And I think that sequence really works because of that, because you're stripping away all of the shit that you would expect in these sort of horror movies that give out the boobies, and not have it be about that at all, but have it be about these poor girls who you didn't like. You're kind of annoyed by them. But now when they're here and they're in jeopardy, you're sort of like, well, not that bad. Like, nobody needs to have this happen to them.
Yeah.
And then it was scripted, the match cut to the coffins overhead, which, I mean,
that was a cool shot. I love that transition. That was great. I think that's the first time I've ever seen a human being get cooked.
You know what? If I were to say anything otherwise, I'd be in jail. So, I've never seen that. Now, you were asking though earlier about a sequence that they didn't let us do. Yeah. There's actually one. We have actually a bunch of different sequences. Some of them have made it into each movie. Some of them it didn't work out for that movie, and it wound up in a subsequent movie because there's only so much. We're sort of running out of runway. But there was a sequence, and it was an extension of one that's in 5 that you'll get to. So I'm going to try and spoiler free. It's like a spa environment, and there's acupuncture, which okay. But we wound up ending it with a colonic. But it's one of these big colonics where he's getting the colonic and you have the insertion, but it reverse engineers. He bloats up like Mr. Creosote and explodes all over the room with shit and blood and everything. And it was written, and you're just watching it. You're like, oh my God, this is the most horrifying thing. And that's when the studio said, no.
Take it back a notch. Take it back.
11 to 8, please. So that's the only one, though. Outside of sort of temperaments, like we maybe have some trims for getting a rating, but even then, it's never been that much of a problem. The age thing with Timmy, as I mentioned, but that was the one sequence when proposed and executed it. The studio's like, hell no, we're not going to see someone explode or leads with defecation. That's not going to work. Wow. So this is my life. Isn't that sad? This is my life thinking about this stuff.
I think it's awesome.
I think it's awesome too.
Write up horrible deaths and try to make it work and make it happen. That's great. So speaking about horrible deaths, is there one that that surprised you in terms of how the audience responded to it, whether it's more than you thought it was going to be or less?
What's funny is that's kind of the way it works for almost any movie. You think you've got it, and you're like, I got this. I got this. And that's the sequence that doesn't land at all. It's this that you've overthought it, and in the head you're thinking about what it could be as opposed to how it would be in front of people. That's why previews, as much as filmmakers said they hate them, they secretly love them because it's like the proof's in the pudding. Like that's the real rubber hits the road moment is when you have those previews.
Yeah.
When we did the bus hit in the first preview, we knew it worked like intellectually, but we had no idea how much it worked until that first preview. To the point where, if you'll go back, there's a shot, like an ND shot of like Alka-Seltzer in a glass.
Okay.
Afterwards, we extended that shot like by double almost because the audience was still just getting their sea legs after completely losing their shit.
Interesting.
So if you watch the audience, you get the hit, but then you're like, "Why? Is this an advertisement for Alka-Seltzer?" No, it's in the theater. People were still like figuring out how to sit down again without messing themselves. So
awesome.
It's funny how comedies work the same way. It's all about suspense, set up a payoff, who knows what, when is the joke going to land, who says what, and when they do it. So they're very similar in terms of how the sequences are structured. It's about the release of information and how that information lands. So if you watch a comedy, sometimes and you're not in a big theater, you're like, that's funny.
Yeah.
We're holding on that reaction shot for a while because it's designed for theatrical comedy.
Make room for the laughs.
The tanning bed got a great reaction. I think mostly because that cut. It's so horrible what's going on within those tanning beds. I mean, it's awful.
And it's really, like, it goes on for a bit. So it was like, I'm watching the blisters happen. I'm watching them get cooked. It's a lot.
But cutting to that overhead is so darkly funny that the audience actually burst out laughing. But we took that as a good sign because laughter is that release of tension. Yeah. Sometimes you're laughing at it, sometimes you're laughing with it, and sometimes you're laughing because you need to, because you're uncomfortable how unnerved you are. So in that respect, we got that reaction we wanted, which was we wanted them to darkly laugh about how absurd and awful the situation was.
The log on the highway, did you guys know that it was going to be a thing? Because in the comments, everybody talks about that one.
Well, because that's the one that you most often find yourself in. Even if it's not logs, you find like a truck full with like plumbing pipes. Like you just sort of like start thinking about all the terrible things that can happen to you. And I think because of the immediacy of that particular circumstance, that everybody's driven behind a big old truck. And if you've ever been between two trucks in the highway, it's like this, you're like chasm of doom with these two 18-wheelers. That's why I think that one has gotten the sort of cultural traction it has, and it's again instantly memeable. We had so much trouble shooting that sequence. I think we were Vancouver Island, and there was a 5-mile stretch of highway that hadn't opened yet, brand new, and there was like 2 miles here, a little ridge, and then another 2 miles here. So over here we had 200 picture cars, and on the top of the ridge we just had a little like setback, so we could drive with the tow rigs up here, turn around, drive back the other side to get a whole shooting. So you can get double the pleasure, double the fun on this side. This side was the Valley of Death. This side is where we staged all of the actual stunts and gags at the same time. Because we could be doing this while they're setting up, and then we'd stop. The director would take a motorcycle right over, make sure everything's cool. We'd do the gag, and they'd take a motorcycle right back, and go back to doing the tow work on the car. So, but what was interesting is we thought this will be easy. We'll get these logs, we'll put them on a flatbed, and great. We were shooting there for 2 weeks, shooting that sequence forever. And by that point, all the sap from the logs, kind of gravity did its job, seeped and practically solidified. We wound up saying, "Okay, take the shot, release the logs." Boom, nothing. We went past it, full sticks of dynamite to try and blow the fucking things off, and finally they wouldn't come off the truck. So the VFX supervisor, God bless him, said, "Just do a pass with the flatbed with no logs on them, nothing." Which we did. Every single log in that, once they fall, is digital.
What?
Really?
There are a couple that are placed in the road because they didn't have to move.
Yeah.
But, and the one that goes through the thing, we took one of the logs and put it on like this big pike, and that's rammed it through. But all the bouncing logs, everything, all digital.
I mean, that makes sense, actually, not that you mentioned it, because of the
I
shooting
could
at the
go
shot, but I
back
didn't
and
even
watch
think
it
about that.
again.
Yeah, because a lot of times when we're watching, especially movies from the early 2000s with CG, you can tell.
Yeah.
It's
and
so jarring.
There are a couple of shots, but in general, that sequence really holds up.
Yeah.
I give Joe Bauer, who was our VFX supervisor, he's going on to do all Game of Thrones, so he's like got Emmys. He could juggle Emmys with like 6 of them. He brought a lot of like understanding of both motion blur, camera shake, and just little details that just made it feel more real. As I said, you are not inclined to believe visual effects unless there's a detail that seems so real because it's so observed that your lizard brain will then recalculate and say, this must be real because they added that. Which is why, by the way, as a total aside, which is why Pixar movies are amazing because they have nothing. Like they have to think of how a person walking through the density of air would impact the motes of dust that we see in a sunbeam. That's all math. They have to figure all that out. And then add on to that, it's silent. There's nobody walking anywhere. So all the sound design is equally unbelievable because the tiniest detail that isn't there, that lizard brain that we all have is going to go, bullshit. Bullshit.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. It's the absence of those common things that you're so used to that would draw your attention to it. Yeah.
It takes you out of a movie in a way that you're not sure you don't know why, but then you're like, oh, okay. It's because the way the heels clicked on that didn't feel like it was in that space. Suddenly we're into just doing Foley, and now I'm thinking process, not story.
Yeah.
Did any of the cast of the Final Destination franchise ever come up with their own deaths, or have fans suggested deaths that were actually used and made it into the movies?
Well, great question. First is no, the actors haven't. We need to be so far down the road of getting the movie sort of like to the place where the studios say, yes, this is all working. Now, they may have some like gestures or things to help, again, lend authenticity. You want to have, I had a studio executive once say to me, we got to get the script 100% right. And I was like, then why make it? Why make it? Like, yeah, get it to 90%. But you want to have every creative person you just hired to fill in that gap with their own inspiration and bring something to the party that would elevate it and make it specific and unique and not something so pre-planned. So if you get to 100, stop. Don't make it. You get it 90, that's the perfect time, because now you're allowing people the opportunity to invest in this with their own sort of sensibility.
That's some great advice.
And I think that's one of the things why, it's not that we don't take, but I want to have actors be able to bring those little moments, but they need to have a foundation to be on before those moments are real. Otherwise, you're trying to put a Band-Aid on something. You can tell when actors are putting Band-Aid, as an actress, you put a Band-Aid on something, he's like, this isn't working. How do I make this work? How do I try and deliver this line of dialogue, which they're not letting me change, but it's bullshit. You've been there, right?
No.
Well, that's what happens. So it's a careful dance to make sure that everybody feels heard, but you also have to make sure the information is needed for the story. Anyway, other things that we could talk about in terms of capture. But in terms of fan stuff, you can't.
Oh.
Because of the legal issues. Somebody can say, that's my idea. Somebody's saying, I want to do one in a diner. That's not a copyrightable idea. That's just a location.
Yeah.
It's the execution of an idea that makes it copyrightable. But you don't want to open yourself up for any kind of nuisance litigation, which would just stop the process of moving forward. So in general, trust me, we've already thought of and codified and written down every possible thing, good or bad, that might happen, so we can point to a timeline that now we have this idea here.
So when you come up with ideas, do you have to patent your death ideas?
It's not patent. What you do is, when you have the script written, that they register that script and the execution of that idea. So let's say you want to do one at a skating rink, just an ice skating rink.
Right.
There's a lot of things that could most likely happen. There's going to be sharp skates. There's potentially going to be, if it's a lake, freshwater lake, there's going to be people falling in. There's shards of ice that can come up. There's a certain list of things that are inevitably going to be part of a death sequence. Right. So you can't sue over that because it's organic to the circumstance. But how we get people into the situation where they find themselves, that's the stuff of copyright, because that's the sort of inspiration. You can give people 30 different things on a table, and they'll make 30 different pieces of art.
True.
But
yeah.
your piece of art is the only one that is specific to you, and that's what you're copyrighting. That's why most of these lawsuits, when people say they stole my idea, nobody steals your idea. Every year, well, at least back when there was a real pitching season for network, all the executives would hear maybe 6 or 7 shows that were exactly the same. They're all the same idea.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But it's about execution, which is the best version of that idea. And then the other calculus is, are we going to spend the next 5 years with this person? Do we like them enough to say, that person has the same idea, but it's not as good, but we like them more. Let's see, we like the general idea, we'll go for the person we like. But there's a whole, I want to get into the nuance of copyright law, but that's one of the reasons why we just want to basically create internally. Though I will say this, there have been 3 comic book limited run series based on the FD franchise, and there were 6 books published in England that were original books based on the idea.
Okay.
Now, all of those are owned by New Line, so there were versions of set pieces that existed in those books that wound up in the movies. So you can't really copyright a death. You can just copyright the execution of the death. So we try and stay away from fan input directly, not because we don't love our fans, but because we want to make sure that there's protection for both sides, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It never even occurred to me.
Totally makes sense. Yeah. All right.
Alrighty. Well, okay, this next one is a bit whatever. There's some fan theories on the interwebs that the mortician in the first film, played by Tony Todd, is actually death personified. Was this planned?
That is another question that has been, quite frankly, haunting me for 20 years.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Look, Tony, initially the character, we wanted to find a creepy sort of environment, that there's somebody who you may or may not be a bit more well-versed in the mechanics of death would be able to be, the font of exposition that we needed to get the sort of train moving on what may or may not be a way out of the circumstance, which is why he existed in the first one. And the way Tony plays it, it does feel like, well, okay, he has a job, but he seems really, really well-versed.
Yeah.
And it's a spooky environment. Now, you can ask Tony, and he does have sort of an operating principle behind the character, but he won't tell you what it is, which is fine.
Yeah.
As actors, they go into the role, they have a secret, they don't tell anybody because they need to have that dude get that. But by not telling us, it's both kept the character interesting and mysterious. but has also created, as you said, the interwebs going bananas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so we did just watch the third one, and
Yeah.
I haven't looked this up yet, but his voice is in the third one,
Because he's not
right?
personally in it, so
No,
Oh,
he wasn't available. He's in the third one, but
okay,
he's visually not available.
yeah.
If
Okay.
you
okay, cool.
well, ADR, which is something you could schedule in post, so you've got
Yeah.
30 weeks to post, a lot more time to do
Yeah.
it then. So in order for sort of I think world consistency, we did bring him back.
I thought
And
that was awesome.
Yeah, I was very glad that he was both willing, even though it was an on-screen role,
Mhm.
to sort of be one of the bedrock rails of the franchise.
I mean, he has such a great voice, so
Yeah.
and having him do exposition is awesome.
He's huge. He's like 6'5", and his hands are like it's like shaking hands with a skillet. It's just like amazing.
Wow.
Awesome.
Okay.
And he's
Okay.
lovely too. I mean, I for all of the horror movies and either malevolent or sort of threatening people, he's like the kindest, nicest, coolest guy. So he's super cool and really interesting and very well versed and smart. So
Ali Larder as Clear Rivers. So
Yes.
in the first movie, she's the survivor girl. Was there a reason for her fiery death in the second one that instead of just having a
outside of
character?
it being awesome. Well, yeah. Look, there are two things. One, we only had one option on her as an actress, so there's that. The second thing, yeah, when you hire people, often, especially at that point, you get options for other movies just in case. So
Okay.
the studio has the option to bring her back at a set price, or any of those actors. Which is why it was very different for American Pie to American Pie 2. We had options for them for one movie, but for American Wedding, the price went way up because the studio did not have a legal option on them for their services.
Right.
So at that point, they had to pay for their services. So this was a situation where we just felt like it would be so much more interesting if we took the audience with a character they knew, and then at the last second, completely got rid of her.
Yeah.
Like made her sort of the guru of the movie. That she was the soothsayer, the person who seemed to know everything, or at least was going to help them. And then pull the rug out at the last minute, so that AJ Cook had to figure it out that last bit on her. And it worked. I think that her dying there, you're just like, what?
Totally.
Spent so much time getting to her, getting her out.
Yeah.
Being with her, and then you kill her.
Yes.
It felt like it was the right move for that particular movie to keep the plate spinning in an interest. You never, especially for these movies, you never know whether there's going to be a subsequent, the right to make another movie. Like there's no guarantee for sequels. You have to do well enough, either creatively or commercially, and hopefully both, to definitely commercially, in order to justify another bite at the apple.
Yeah, makes sense.
We just felt like if other studios or other people would have said, maybe, let's keep her alive, because what if there's another one? But we're like, we have no idea, but there's going to be another one. So let's just do it right. Let's just take care of business. Now, like, look at the third one, FD3. It originally ended with camera after Chris Lemke is killed, and like the camera moves down. They're walking away from the fair, and it goes in the camera on the ground and takes a picture. That's the end. That was the original ending of the movie.
Oh.
Yeah, your look of like, the fuck? Is exactly what. Now, what's interesting is that was in the original script. It was greenlit because of the success of the first one, and we were off to the races. And we were all kind of like, is this really working? Like, it's not. But the decision was, keep going. It's hard enough to get any movie greenlit. If you've got the rubber stamp to make it, just make it. We'll fix it later. Just go. And true to form, we tested horribly. The movie tested fine, but at that ending, I swear to God, I thought it was like the Christians and the Lions in the Coliseum. They were tearing the seats up in the theater and hurling them at the screen with loathing. We were able to redirect. The studio heads came in. They were like, that didn't test that. And he goes, it didn't. And here's the fix. So we immediately, like with a toddler, redirected to the fix. And the meeting went from probably would have been an hour of haranguing to 5 minutes. They said, that sounds great. Go shoot it. Here's $3 million. So we went off. And every single thing from the point where he gets squished to the end was all, except for one shot on stage.
Wow. Okay.
Every single, the overhead shot at the very beginning of the sequence of the train goes over camera, that's stock footage from a New York subway. Everything else we built, the landing we built, the trains we built, or the miniature. Because we didn't have the money to do it for real. But those train cars that we were all in, those were the train cars from Men in Black 2 that we had shipped up from down the road. Once you've watched 5, we'll have a recap about something you'll see in 5 that was originally intended to be in 3, but wound up just being kicked down the road 7 years, which is why these movies are fun, because it's sort of like Ouroboros keeps moving through. Oh, and then I think it says a lot about Jim Wong as a director. There's that sequence where we pull out of Mary Elizabeth Winstead's eye and the tear goes down. And when we were originally shooting that, there's a lot. That's all on stage. So you've got it's on a gimbal. So there's people making it move. There's extras. There's a pretty complicated camera move to make that work. And it wasn't all working. Everything was aligning. And we're on take 8. Take 9. She's trying to stay in the emotional place. She's not the kind of actress who's going to say, "Give me the glycerin." She wants to be in the moment, which is to her credit. And when you talk about credit, you credit to Jim Wong. He's watching all this going down. He goes, "You know what, guys? I've completely made a mistake of this. I'm going to need 10 minutes just to figure out how to reconceive this, because I've led us down a path that's not going to help me editorially. Just give me 10 minutes." So he walks outside, and everyone kind of goes, takes a break, and I kind of toddle outside. I was like, "What's going on?" He's like, it was clear that it was getting the pressure up. I'm totally fine. I just needed her to know it wasn't her fault. We went back in after 10 minutes, and first take, and that's just good directing, because you realizing that it's not about whether she's talented or untalented, that the situation can sometimes bring more pressure to bear.
Yeah, for sure.
And there were a couple of moments like that. Like for the first one, there's that shot after the crash where the camera's going up the eaves of the so a little bit of the roof into the window of his bedroom, and there's rain coming down. You see his parents, they give him a hug. There's a whole scene written to take place inside the room. But we do the move, we go up, we look through the window, and Jim looks at it, plays it back again. He goes, "We're done. Pull up work from tomorrow. I've told that story. I don't need to go in and cover that scene." And that's, again, knowing your story, knowing your moment, and knowing what you're doing as a director, have the confidence to go on. So those are the kind of things that I like taking away from any movies, like those little nuggets of how you approach actors, situation, and just the confidence of knowing when the story has been told, as opposed to over covering it or just going beyond what you need to do. Just get the beat, and when you have it, don't question it. Move on.
Really love that story. Yeah, that's really cool. All right, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit here.
Okay.
I have to ask, what did you do to get a thanks credit for the movie Clueless?
Okay. No, I wasn't working at the mall. As the vice president of creative affairs for the producer of that. So I developed the script when it was put in turnaround from Fox, and Scott swooped in and grabbed it. We did a quick triage with Amy on getting that script to a slightly different place. So it would be more in line with what Paramount was looking to do. And then the way it went.
Cool.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So that is my first on-screen credit of any kind. So not a bad place.
Yeah, that's a pretty good start. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clueless is a pretty damn good start.
And then we hired Mona May for American Reunion to do our costumes. So Hollywood's like Appalachia. It's super incestuous and very small, and everyone knows everything. So wait, that's weird. Never mind.
Hypothetically, let's say American Pie and Final Destination are in the same universe. How do you imagine Stifler dying?
To be honest, syphilis. I think he died of syphilis. I think that just makes complete sense. It's organic. It's right. And
Just raging syphilis.
raging, brain-rotting syphilis.
Oh no.
I mean, or some other corrosive venereal disease, whichever one that would work.
What about Jim?
Well, honestly, I think Jim would be the one to have the premonitions, because he's so naturally anxious. To see him have a premonition and have that sort of send him into an anxiety spiral could be quite funny at the same time. It would play great under like impending death.
It will be the sweatiest scene ever filmed.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the scene where like they're talking about the magazines and the first American Pie. He and Eugene Levy. We were shooting in this like it wasn't even a stage. It was a warehouse in the valley in Los Angeles in Burbank. And it was 100 degrees at camera, because we couldn't pay to keep the air conditioning on to the degree that would cool the whole space.
Yeah.
So all that sweat is real. Real sweat. It's real sweat. It's not flop sweat. It's actual oh my God, the crew is drenched in sweat.
Oh,
Oh
Yeah.
no, oh
But
man,
it worked for the movie.
it
Makes
worked,
sense.
it
yeah.
worked really well. Yeah, he looked
I
like
think Eugene sweated through 4 shirts while we were shooting.
Oh,
a. Oh man, between these two franchises, why do you
It's
hate teenagers?
well, I mean, like, what's funny is that like Final Destination are sequences where you plug in characters.
Hmm.
American Pie are characters that you put into situations because you're familiar with these characters. You want to see how they would react to certain influences and certain dynamics. So they're almost the polar opposite of each other,
Yeah.
and completely contradict all known methodology of storytelling. But they seem to work just by just the alchemy of how things come together. Who knew?
so what was the most difficult or most complicated, like either death scene or just setup in general for the first
Oh,
three Final Destinations?
the first 3. Well, honestly, I mean, there's really no easy one. They're all
Mm.
super complicated because you not just have to figure out technically how to execute, but just logically. They have to be credible to the point of incredible, but not tilt into incredible because then you're like, I don't buy it.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
have to be just plausible enough, and that's a hard tonal balance to strike. The roller coaster sequence was obviously made up of tons of bits and pieces.
Mm.
And as a Vancouverite, like the only roller coaster in all of North America that would actually allow us to shoot there happened to be in Vancouver because Playland is
Right.
owned by the government.
I was just gonna say it's P&E, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's owned by the government, so they were like, "You want to shoot here? You're going to pay us? We don't care. We care about brand fidelity." Every other place we looked at, they were worried. We can't have people die on our roller coaster. Like they're not dying.
Mm.
So we kind of lucked out that it was in Vancouver
Mhm.
because there was really literally not a single other roller coaster in North America that were allowed to shoot on it. So, but that was very complicated just because you have actors hanging upside down against massive green screens. You have all of them doing their own decelerator stunts. They worked with JJ McCarrow, who is our stunt supervisor, and we got Mary Winston. The camera's on the ground, gunning up to a 30-foot tall roof, and she's on the decelerator falling towards camera. I mean, this is cool. Like the actors had a good time, but they all had to go through. I'm not gonna say extensive training, but they had to be specifically trained so that they would hurt themselves, so they could focus on acting and not like, am I actually gonna die doing this? And there's just a lot of bits and pieces. That's the one thing that people, I think they inherently know, but when you really break it down, there's the actors talking. Yes, we're talking back and forth, and there's things that they do as they move through a set piece. But then there's the whole second story underneath of all the little bits and pieces that are also interacting via the sort of fickle finger of death, pushing things in this direction so that they line up. That's a whole B story that has to be shot, conceived, executed. Like the second units on these movies are enormous because they're tracking an entirely separate but connected story to the actors talking on top of it and the actors interacting on top of it. So all of them are so complicated. I would say though, I mean, look, I don't think you've seen the trailer, so it's not giving. The bridge collapsed in 5. That was a 62-day schedule, and we spent 19 days of that 62-day schedule working on 6 minutes of movie.
Wait, 62 days for the whole shoot, and you spend 19 days doing
19 days of it for 6 minutes of actual film.
Wow.
Even the studio's like, this is stupid. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And we're like, this is literally what it takes to get this, because we were only on the actual Lionsgate Bridge for 1 day.
Wow.
Everything else was either built, digital. There's up the road a bit. There was a side of a mountain, which was like a repository for equipment. It was not even like flat. It was like an area that they dug out where they could put road equipment so that they wouldn't have to travel it. And so we took that out, graded it, flattened it, and built a 200-foot section of the bridge on that. So when we were shooting off of it, it went down and looked like it was the ocean because it was high enough in the mountain. So we would have to do all the visual effects. It was cheaper to do that than to digitally comp in backgrounds for every single one. And then for the shots we were shooting against the mountain, because it was going up this way, we'd do a French reverse, their names, we'd part their hair separately to split the film so we could continue the action and making it was crossing both axes, but we only had one axis we could shoot in because of the drop-off.
That's crazy.
But going in the other direction towards the other side of them, there was a 100 by 200 foot retractable green screen. So we could digitally extend the bridge past that 200 feet that we had. And that's,
oh my God.
That's the thing. Like we spent, I think, $260,000 a day for 9 days shooting just that section because there was so much going on. And I mean, George, as you know, like you've got to have 2 20 by 20s with cranes to sort of even out the lighting. When you're up there, it's just like you have to, when you have a 200-foot section, you're just moving them so the actors are not getting hit too hard. Plus, we had 10 by 10. They call them fly swatters, where they're green screen little 10 by 10s that are on these little mobile devices. You wheel them into place, and they kind of like you have a green chip. Then we they're all like these little trolleys. It was bananas, and that's just one little section of all the other stuff that we needed to do when we were on the stage up at Mammoth. So that I think just technically was the most complicated because it was amortized for 19 days with so many different disciplines clicking into each other. But you'll see.
Yeah, I was gonna say when we get around to that scene, we're gonna really have to really savor this just because of all the effort that's put into it. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, let's see. So speaking earlier, you mentioned the actors having to be trained or at least prepared for safety reasons.
Sure.
There are dozens of films that are famously cursed, right, due to injury or whatever, like Exorcist, for example. Was there anything that happened on set that was eerily similar to what was going on in the movie?
No, I'm only laughing because you would think there would be, given the franchise. There would be like multiple incidents. Thankfully, knock on what this looks like fake. No, we've not. We've had 2 incidents of I would say either near misses or like, oh, that was close. But never have we had, because look, they're so technically complicated and there's so much redundancy in the prep because there's so many times people ask the same questions that we've been very fortunate. There have been very, very few, even close calls. Like there hasn't been like, oh my God.
That's awesome.
There were 2 incidences. The first one was on FD1 at the end when they're in France. And it hits the bus hits the post and it goes up and knocks the Cafe Miro reversed 180 sign down. Well, actually 1.5. When Devon Sawa, or the stunt guy, gets knocked out of the way of the sign, he was tackled hard. Like those 2 guys, and his head hit that tarmac like it sounded like a coconut opening. Didn't split his head open, but he got a concussion doing that. But when it hit the signpost, that was obviously our signpost. We put it there. And Setdeck had taken those little like do not park signs that have the little metal band that goes around that kind of like tighten it in. What you would do for any post sign, right? Well, when the bus hit that sign, the metal band snapped. They would never imagine that it would have snapped off. Bolts broke, and it went skittering, hit the wall, and Karam, there's a bunch of guys selling food in little carts down at the end, and it hit the stunt guy right in the head, and he had like 97 stitches. It literally scalped him. Like,
oh, no.
So he did the shot, he stands up, and he goes, issue, his whole scalp fell down. Now, again, he's a stunt guy. They signed up
yeah.
in the hospital, they shaved his head, they stapled him together, and he came back to watch playback. He's like, that's really cool. So that's one time where, you give credit to stunt people. One time, like, you would have to think ahead 50 different ways that's exactly what would happen if it hit, and it would actually have to hit the side of the building exactly the right angle. That was, I guess, a final destination moment. There were insert shots on FD3 of the tubes of the fireworks going off.
Okay.
And that was like a B camera thing, and they were down there, and the firework didn't actually shoot up, but exploded right there in front of camera, and it actually shattered the lens. And the operator, who was behind some stuff, still like the fire, like all his eyebrows are singed off, and his hair was singed back, and like he came up and he's like, "I never looked better." But obviously that was not planned, and it's one of these things where all the safety measures you can think of. Now what? 17 years later, you probably do the entire thing remotely. We were shooting actual film cameras back there, and everyone's like, yeah, this is fine. We should be okay. The special effects people, the fireworks people are like, you should be fine, but it's that 1 in a million thing. That's why you have insurance, right? Those are only the 2 times we've ever been close to what would be considered an actual Final Destination moment.
But also that is so Final Destination. It's like all these little things happening so perfectly that something bad happens.
Yeah, you couldn't duplicate it. It could never happen. It's a once in a lifetime thing.
Bonkers. Here I am going into another question, not about Final Destination. I apologize. But I'm just so curious. You're credited as an associate producer on The First Wives Club. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience with that film?
Well, again, I was working for the producer of that movie. His name is Scott Rudin. He's one of the more infamous and famous producers, incredibly prolific, incredibly talented, very smart guy. That movie, I was tasked with trying to get it together. And my job at the time was to get the script to the point where we could cast with it. And so I oddly was flown to live with the writer for 2 weeks in Natchitoches, Louisiana, at his house. We just went to his backyard office and banged out that script. They got the 3 women to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
So then subsequent rewrites with Paul Rudnick, who came in to kind of like do the comedy pass, but he stayed on board for weeks. And then being on set, like I was on set at 5 a.m. in New York when those 3 ladies were dancing to the classic musical ending down the street, which the DP had lit up with all the neon signs. If you look at that, you can see the sky, and George, you'll know this, it's a little blue because the sun's coming up. And we barely got that in the can because the previous take, Bet had broken a heel going down. So wardrobe scrambled to get the duplicate so that we had enough time to do one more take before it was just the end of the Innocents. So
Wow.
so that's, and then because I was so intimately involved with that, I actually got hired to write a treatment for a sequel by Paramount, which not necessarily imaginatively called First Wives Club Round 2, which so that never went anywhere. I think I got hired. I was grateful for the cash at the time. It wound up going through a couple of different drafts with different people. It didn't necessarily get out of it was so aligned with those 3 actresses that it felt like if you did anything else. So time went by, people fell off. It was rebooted as a African-American TV show, oddly enough, a couple of years back, which ran for like a half a season.
Okay.
But it's never gone anywhere. So that is my experience with First Wives Club. When we did FD2, we had a preview. And obviously there's the elevator gag where she gets her head. By the way, that is all based on a real incident. That's based on the truth. Most of these incidents happen for real. And we would read about them and then sort of transmogrify them into sort of more FD appropriate, or they're all true. That happened to a woman. It was actually her boyfriend it happened to, and she was the one in the elevator with his head for about 40 minutes before they could like fix it and get it off. So
What?
but that's I know. This you wouldn't believe what comes in my inbox. It's fucking terrifying.
So we'll never get into an elevator ever again.
Well, but that's what was interesting. We had the preview, the sequence worked, and I'm in the parking garage. Usually, right after a preview, I run to the bathroom and I pretend to be peeing for 10 minutes so I can listen to what everyone's saying in an artist way. But we were going. We had sort of done our debrief, and we were walking back to get our cars after the preview, and the elevator came. And the doors opened a little bit, stopped, opened, and then like froze like this. And these 2 people go, "Oh hell no!" And they walk to the stairs. They're right there, and it's working.
Oh my god!
And that's really what we're working for. So that's what you want, is the take-home value of FD. Is that it kind of ruins whatever you try to do. Going to the dentist, go to get your haircut. Go. If it works out, there'll be a lovely tattoo piercing parlor sequence in FD6 that will really, really not make
George.
You tattoos for no, probably.
Yeah, you're not gonna get any more ink, bro. It's not gonna get.
In your first comment, right, that got all this started in the Final Destination 1 reaction. You said that Clear is actually named after the director's previous assistant.
Correct.
Are there any other characters that are named after somebody like Frankie Cheeks can't be a real person? That's like like Quagmire and
no, it's not really. A lot of the characters are named after famous genre and horror directors, and that's pretty well known. The first, we kind of abandoned that practice because we started to have to go so deep that it wouldn't matter. And what's interesting is, depending upon where you say the movie is being set, you have to have clearances, meaning there can't be anybody in like 100-mile radius of that established location with that same name. Otherwise, they can sue and say, "Hey, you based this character off of me. I don't like what you said about me. You owe me money." So,
wow,
of course, people would do that.
Sometimes there was one situation that I pardon me for forgetting, but there was a character name who was a genre director, but because where it was putatively set, they found someone with a similar name, so we couldn't actually use that. And I believe the actor who played Frankie Cheeks, Sam Easton, was cast like 4 days before he started shooting. And he was just a stand-up comic in Vancouver.
He did a great job at being so punchable in that.
Just
the worst.
Just the worst. Like not even worth scraping off the bottom of your shoe, for sure.
Oh my god.
So unfortunately, outside of Clear Rivers, which was just nobody knew we'd make a movie beyond the first finalist. It was originally called Flight 180. That was the shooting title. It was Flight 180. studio heads, and actually I have a crew jacket over there, which you don't often have to have warm clothes, but up here I do, and it says Flight 180 on the lapel because it was from the shooting of Final Destination.
Nice.
But obviously that's not like, if you saw a movie titled Flight 180, okay, is it about an airplane? That's what you'd think, but it's not. I mean, it is, but it's not really.
Yeah.
So the marketing people came with a whole roster of different titles that at least were related to travel, and Final Destination became one big hit. Which is really not something you would name a movie if you ever thought there'd be sequels. That's really not smart.
I would imagine you're probably pretty tired of the joke about like, oh, it's still the final one, la 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 la.
Well, look, for American Pie, we had a big meeting with everybody in marketing. The movie had tested great. Everyone was really happy. And there's like 40 seat conference room. That's a big conference room, a big table. And we're all there in marketing and the filmmakers, and the head of marketing came in and said, okay, we have come up with what we think is a great title for this movie. Comfort food. That's exactly what and one of the other people involved in the movie was like, for this movie, are you out of your fucking mind? Which is probably not a very politic thing to say. Everybody, but it did break the ice and say what everyone was feeling. So they brought out like the 3,000 titles that have been generated by this outside vendor. And Paul and Chris Weitz were the ones who sort of took column A to column B and said, why don't we call it American Pie? And this is one of those kismet moments where I was like, yeah. Now, here's another thing. I think it's, and this is maybe, so in order to have the gentleman who wrote the song American Pie not sue Universal, he gets $500,000 per movie to not sue, even though we never use the song.
Just because of the title.
Wow.
Just because the title, the evocative nature of that title, they thought it was worth their money just to pay him off rather than to run the risk of litigation.
You know what? I mean, that makes sense because, like, when I first heard of the movie, that's where my mind went immediately.
You went to, oh, that song's a story. What is it? You think it's really, and that? So I get it, but that's a big bite out of your budget.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Go on screen.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we used obviously a very small section of Highway to Hell in FD2. Yeah, that was $500,000.
Wow. Oh my God.
Okay.
Yeah, music licensing it's a real thing. Yeah. It's the real deal.
You gotta write me some songs. You gotta start producing some music.
You mentioned the name thing, and that reminded me of the story. And I don't know if it's true. Maybe you can confirm this about how if someone finds out there's a film production going on, they'll like try to time their lawnmower to hearing speed, and then wait till you pay them.
There's entire line items in the budget for just incidentals on locations when you have to pay people off. It's funny. There was one movie we were working on, and the guy had his dog. The dog was barking. And the first night, we were there for the whole week. The first night, he said, "Oh, that's okay." Second night, it was $100. By the end of the fifth night, it's $1,000 to have his dog not bark. Production is seen as an ATM for most people, and it's very frustrating because, dude, we're all here just working. A lot of this is just middle class people trying to get the job done. You're just gouging something because you can. Although alternately, I was talking to somebody on this movie, and like the cops, he was friends with cops, and the cops said, if anybody tries to gouge you, we'll talk to them. And I want those cops. Yeah. On the flip side, we were shooting in a small town for American Pie, the first American Pie, and I was there talking with my other fellow producer, and I look over, and there's Jason Biggs in handcuffs being put in a police car. So we're like, run over there. And what had happened was, he and the second AD were walking him back to base camp from where we were shooting in a little town strip. And he was like 19 at the time. So he jumped up and he hit a sign with his hand as he was walking there. So a cop comes over and says, "You can't do that. Where's your ID?" He's like, I'm in wardrobe. I don't. What do you mean you're in wardrobe? You don't have any ID? And the second AD said, "Sir, I'm sorry, we're just shooting this movie." He said, "I'm not talking to you." And like Jason's from Jersey. He's like, "What the fuck are you talking to that lady for?" And the cop's like, "Hold on." But what we found out is all of this is because we had hired an actual security company to provide security, not off-duty police officers. So we had to hire the security company and hire the off-duty police officers, and now it was all the problem. It was a shakedown.
Wow.
All the time. All the time.
That's amazing and really depressing, but wow.
Production, man. Not for the faint of heart.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Let's end on something positive, not how things have gone haywire.
Alrighty. Okay.
No,
Well,
Let me ask you
Sure.
this.
Oh.
Of the first 3 movies you've watched, and again, I have no dog in this hunt, which one is the one you like the most in totality? Not set pieces, but what is the one that seemed to be the most cohesive?
For me, it's the first one because because there was so much to explain, to establish the rules and stuff like that, and exposition was not boring, which is like
Right. Because you're desperate to find out too.
exactly. I want to know as well, and it was so interesting, and it had this vibe of like it was a group of people's passion project. It had that feel before it,
Yeah.
it wasn't. It didn't just feel like another Hollywood attempt to make a blockbuster, but it was just, hey, let's just do something unique.
This is weird. Let's try this.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think, oh man, I think it's for me, it's maybe the second one.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really loved how it tied into the first one, and you kind of get those little tidbits and of like,
Mhm.
oh wait, it's all connected. What is going on? And then, yeah. But then also the third one because so many squishy deaths, and like I love it. I love it so much when there's like,
Just
I just
people
want to
popping
see
like a
people.
cherry.
I love it. It's
We
gross.
call it
It's so
porno.
great.
What
What's
about for you
interesting
personally?
Well, look, for me, it vacillates between 2 and 5 are my favorite, with 1 kind of right behind because it's the first and sort of established the bedrock.
Mhm.
The third one I think is beautifully made. Actually, it's well shot. It's well put together. I just don't think it feels particularly necessary. I
Okay.
think it happened. It's good. It's some fun deaths, and some
Mhm.
of the moments are funny, but it doesn't spin the conceit to justify why it has to get made. You just could make it.
Mhm.
I think that the DVD that we did at the time was far more interesting because we shot several days of additional footage that on the DVD you could choose your own adventure. You could get to a place in the movie and say, I want Frankie Cheeks to do this. And we had a whole subset where he would do something
What?
you could see all the footage on his camera that he was rolling.
Wow.
Yeah. We had 3 different it was a choose your own adventures DVD back in 2006.
Oh my god, I need to get my hands on
Yeah,
this.
I gotta find a copy.
Hard to get a hold of, to be honest with you. They're hard to find.
Okay.
But what's interesting, you talk about FD2 with that sequence, you realize that was the one sequence that the studio wanted to cut. They did not want us to shoot that sequence. Like, it's not necessary. It doesn't matter. I'm like, no, the whole movie lives and dies because of this sequence. That's why the movie exists.
Mhm.
Really earn that, shoot some stuff quickly, scrape accounts, and pay within the constraints of the budget to buy back that sequence that they didn't want us to shoot. And to me, it's the reason it's the reason the movie exists. It's the reason the movie works well because all of a sudden everything's connected.
Yeah.
Bigger plan at work. And if you're going to do a sequel, suggest something more than just what's in the confines of the movie you've made. Something bigger. We're all part of something that's larger than all of us. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you responded to that because it just justifies even now, 20 years later, that was the right thing to fight for that sequence.
Let's say you are going to be a character that dies in Final Destination 6. How would you like your own death to be?
Quick. Just really quick. Because if you think about the alternate, that's a good question too. I haven't honestly really thought about that because every time I think about what a death sequence might be, I'm looking at it in the service of what might go on the shelf for further movies down the road, right?
Mm.
And nobody really wants to think about their own demise. You sick bastard! Why would you do that to me? Honestly, never thought about it in those terms, but I do think having had to imagine slow and disturbing deaths for 20 years for people, I think fast. I'd like a bus hit. Give me a bus hit.
Okay. And it's not you. It's gonna be Greg Berry.
Greg Berry, and he pops like a ripe berry all over the street.
There you go.
There you go.
Excellent.
One last little thing, not a question, but a note from a friend who knew that we were doing this interview.
Okay.
No spoilers for the sake of George and I, but he wanted to say that the reveal in Final Destination 5 was his all-time favorite, and he quotes, "We all lost our shit." It was him and some friends watching, in a small room in a small town, and they just.
I look forward to getting there and figuring out what
I know,
the hell
I'm
he's
like,
talking about.
That's the thing.
Sure,
In the
sure.
spirit of that moment for you guys, I won't speak to any great detail, but what I will say is it was an idea that had been batted around in our head since 3, actually.
Okay.
But we just couldn't get all the elements together to make it actually work until 5. Even if we'd never made Final Destination 6,
Mm-hmm.
we could put a capstone on the franchise with 5 in a great way, so that everybody who watched the arc of the entire 5 movies would feel well and fully satisfied by it. So, with that intriguing sort of look at the totality of the franchise, I look forward to seeing your reaction to 5.
I can't wait to
Excellent.
watch the next 2 movies.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Let's just end this so we can go watch
You
4
can
right
wait
now.
on
Let's just do
4.
4.
You can wait on 4, but 4 it's a good object lesson into how the best of intentions sometimes don't deliver the best.
Okay.
Fair enough.
What else you got for me?
That's actually all the questions that we have.
Yeah.
Okay.
We were under the impression that you're gonna be busy and maybe you didn't have much
Oh,
time. But
that phone call that I took, which you probably edited out, is going to change the next 48 hours of my life. Okay. It's the nature of the beast.
we can conclude the call here and maybe have you order some room service and enjoy the day.
There you go. Well, then why don't we conclude the call so I can go put out what has gone from a bonfire to a raging forest fire.
Oh shit.
Um,
Okay.
Again, it happens. But what I will say this is for all the people who are watching this for the first time or watching these guys for the first time, go back into the playlist and watch all of their videos because they are enormously entertaining. The comments at the end are incredibly insightful. And if anything, they're wildly funny too. So
Thank you.
definitely check out more. And I appreciate you taking the time and allowing me to participate here. Because if you look at some of the people who are posting, they're like, that's not a real account. He's bullshit. I'm like, I can't wait for them to say, no,
Yeah.
Suck it.
Vindication.
I'm a real boy. So,
Oh, man.
Well, thank you very
But-
much. Thank you very much for
Yes,
giving your day
seriously.
and your time to speak
Yeah.
out with us.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
Your insight and getting some info that I just had no idea. It was really, really cool.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That was so much
absolutely.
fun.
Glad to have been able to participate. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Hopefully we can do this again some other time.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And with that, we bid you adieu, but don't cut because obviously we'll do a bump out.
Yeah.